Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Practices for Managing Irregular Operations and Schedule Changes. Hi, I'm Judy Howard with ARC's Customer Experience and Operations, and I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker today, who is Paige Blunt. She's the Manager of Industry Relations of Airline Retailing, and her subgroup in the Debit Memo Working Group, the IROC focus group, has been working on this topic for over a couple years. So a lot of hard work has gone into this. So we're glad that you can join us today and to have Paige here to present all of the details regarding this topic. But before we get started and before I hand it over to Paige, I am going to just go over a few housekeeping. This is an interactive session. We want you to ask questions throughout this session. So to do that, just go over to the right hand or your control panel if it's on your right or your left side. And where it has questions, you can write those in. We're also going to do something a little different today as well. You can raise your hand. So if you go to where the option is to raise your hand, you can do so. And when we get a moment, we'll interject the questions throughout the presentation, and you can ask live questions to Paige. So we have that nice opportunity today to have live interaction. So Paige, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thanks everyone for attending.
Hi everyone, I'm Paige Blunt. Thank you so much, Judy. I have been with ARC for about 4.5 years now, and just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about where we are, how we got this thing started, and give you a little background into the whole IROC sched change, the best practices that we've created as a group, and a little bit about what we're hoping to do with those. So really, why is this a big deal? Anytime that you can put a group of people, of different stakeholders and truly competitors within the same room in a very understanding and meaningful way where they can discuss different rules and regulations, of course, no antitrust issues there, but if different kinds of ways that they're managing an IROP or a sched change is a great opportunity. The Debit Memo Working Group was created back in 2013 for just this purpose, really to focus on the debit memos at hand. It was the first time we'd really put 3 kinds of stakeholders in the room together, the airlines, the agents, and the GDSs, to all come together to find some common ground in addressing the volumes of debit memos that were being issued at the time. This group released a best practices for debit memo resolution back in 2018. Some of you may have also been working on that and may have hopefully seen that document. It's hosted on our website. And then the Debit Memo Working Group has a steering group, which really provides oversight to the entire working group and prioritizes our efforts. And they felt that it was important to really look at irregular operations and schedule changes because there has always been a constant concern in debit memo issuance because of some of those issues. The group had a great champion, Debbie Todd-Ecklup from Expedia, really was passionate about this particular topic, and she really was a guiding force for the group. We took about 2 years to make this thing work, many iterations, many meetings, in person, on the phone. Certain ones were for agents only, certain ones for airlines only, and of course we came together for the majority of those, especially the in-person. As you're aware, I'm sure COVID-19 has really heightened the need for some consistency in processes when it comes to schedule changes, and what we are hoping is that maybe these can really benefit the community now and be looked at as something that can be utilized through this unfortunate tragedy for our entire industry and the nation and the world of COVID-19. Next slide, Daryl.
Paige, I do have a question. Someone has raised their hand. If we can interject.
Great.
Okay. Ken, go ahead.
Oh, no question. I'm sorry.
Oh, you didn't mean to raise your hand. Okay.
No worries. But we know that it worked. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about what best practices are. They are truly guidelines. They are recommendations that have come from all three stakeholder groups to say, in the perfect world of managing these problem areas of schedule changes, these are some of the best paths forward that will help agents to be able to manage the business, airlines to be able to rely on the agents to handle the business in the fashion that they've requested. And then it also gives GDSs some guidelines as to how to help both constituents make that happen. ARC is definitely not the police or anything like that here. We will not be enforcing these. They are guidelines. They are not mandates. They are not mandatory. Some, hopefully, the airlines and agents and GDSs will adopt. Others may not, but we will not be holding them responsible if they do not decide to comply. And also, we will try to benchmark the adoption of some of these best practices. However, it may be difficult, depending on what some of those items are, for us to be able to really quantify whether or not, one, adoption has taken place, or two, whether or not they've been successful. I'm hoping that we'll be able to find ways through that, and it may be more of a conversational type of topic instead of the ability to truly say, yes, we've lowered our X, Y, and Z by 5%. That may just not be possible. So let's go ahead and keep moving. We're going to look at the different pieces that we're going to be talking about today of the different, what we're calling chapters of the best practices document. If we can move forward, we can look at the different ways that we are looking to enhance the experience. The first thing is just for the customer itself. We want the customer to have the best options available to them, whether it be from the airline, from the agency, or both, when they are experiencing some sort of irregular operation, or there's just a minor schedule change that happens. Those things happen all the time, and there are some difficulties that we've seen extensively through especially from the agency channel, when there are these kinds of conflicts in terminology, when there are differences in best practice for different airlines, waivers, how to manage a reaccommodation. So we're going to try to work with this document to provide the best customer experience possible. Obviously, GDS communication of changes is a topic that we are going to be looking at, and one of the items here is about how GDSs or airlines are communicating via the GDS. You'd think it would all be standardized, but it definitely is not. Airlines do things very differently and in very unique ways, and we are going to kind of look at a little bit of that through this document. Definitions are another key piece where we want to be sure that when you say schedule change, that you and I and the other 5 people in the room all understand exactly what that means. We want to ensure that there are really set understanding of a time frame maybe for a schedule change versus an irregular operation, how long an agent has to be able to make a reaccommodation for a customer. Those kinds of things are what we're looking to try to put some definition around that's standard through the industry. Then we're talking about some unique situations. We'll get to a few of those a little bit later. And then, a planned schedule change and how to help customers really, tackle that. This planned schedule change comes through many times, and it's a 2-minute change in the timing of the flight, which isn't a huge deal, but customers still do ask. They still want to understand why, especially then when it gets to a larger time frame or a change of the plane and their seat is no longer, that number is no longer on the plane or available, something. So we're going to walk through a little bit about that. And then also the debit memo related issues that result because of schedule changes. We're trying here to create consistency, establish some standardization, hopefully reduce some operational costs, and then, as I said, increase customer satisfaction and retention, because that is a #1 issue that obviously the airlines and the agencies have in common for sure. Okay. Moving on. Let's look at actually an overview of a schedule change first. So this is a definition item. And an airline schedule change here refers to a modification to a scheduled flight itinerary at any point in that flight. And there are some, key reasons that we're going to talk to here about. Key reasons for maybe a market supply and demand. There could be airport conditions, and that would be an IROP. Inclement weather is another irregular operation. Maybe there's crew availability. The pandemic has caused a massive flight change and schedule change for many, many carriers. So many flights have been canceled or reorganized. Schedules are changing, daily, it seems almost. So these are some key reasons why we're having so many different kinds of schedule changes. And then there's the degree or level of impact of that change. Now you can see here, these all in many ways seem to be maybe not as large and imposing as one might think, but in the case of, say, an equipment change, I think that I mentioned earlier, a customer has seat 12D, and his flight has now been changed, and 12D is no longer in maybe a premium seating for that particular aircraft. And so that passenger seat needs to be changed, but the passenger doesn't understand why. We need to be able to convey some of these expectations to our customers as to what happened. The agent needs to be able to relay to the customer why they're no longer sitting in 12D, why they're now sitting in 9D. They may not understand, and a lot of times they do question, especially if they are maybe not a seasoned traveler. Flight number changes, those are so simple, right? It's just a changing of a number, but a customer will ask. It isn't a huge impact to the entire overall flight, but it definitely has implications to the customer. So we're going to try in this document to help and figure that out for the customer figure it out, excuse me. Non-stop changing to direct. Now that sounds, like it might be not a big deal for when you're talking to an average customer, but that is a big deal. Whether or not they're having to stop in another city, connect somewhere, maybe stop and you're staying on the same plane, but you still have to stop. So definitely some of those things that result in, some customer service issues, I'm sure for the airlines directly, as well as for your sellers, your agents. Going on. Let's talk about some recommended industry standard definitions now. Let's go ahead and move forward to the first one. As you know, there are really two kinds of categories and when you're talking about these schedule changes. One is an irregular operation, which throughout this document we call an IROP. It's just a shorter version. And then a planned schedule change, which in many ways in here we're calling just a sched change. So the irregular operation has been recommended by this group of airlines, agents, and GDSs to utilize these standardized descriptors for each item. The involuntary change to the passenger schedule within 72 hours in our context should be called an irregular operation. And a planned schedule change really would be anything that occurs more than 72 hours from that scheduled departure. It's not always that the airline will provide this information at least 30 days prior to departure. Some do and some don't. But it would be best for the agency to be able to manage those expectations for their customers 30 days in advance if the airline has the information. Okay, moving on. There are then, of course, these exception events, and there are many reasons that an involuntary event occurs and then something has to change. There's a snowstorm, there is a hurricane. It could be that there is an error, like in the case of the MAX, there's a problem where those flights had to be taken out of service. And most airlines are having something called either a travel notice or a flex event. And These are great helps for the agency community. Many airlines really try to empower their agency partners to be able to work through these as quickly as possible with as little contact with the airline as possible. They have a very well-scripted website, policy site that the agencies are able to access. They know that's always where they go to get the information, and definitely that's definitely the standard that we would hope that the airlines were striving for. The focus group is really recommending another standardized descriptor for this exception event. Really, this verbiage, exception event, would be the standard for airlines to follow if possible, because it talks about really a very specific event with potential to impact the schedule. It might not have done so, but it has the potential to. And again, you see there, we've talked about all of those, industrial issues, political unrest, terrorism, any of those unfortunate problems that happen today, including weather. Weather is always a big factor and probably the most prominent. So the next one, we're talking about degree of impact to the customer. Every airline has a little bit different idea of how impactful is that particular type of issue going to be to the downline customer. And some of these degrees of change actually are measured and allow agencies to do different things depending on the airline and depending on who the agency is sometimes. But a minor impact change really would be recommended to be that there was a flight number, maybe an inventory only, but you're still in the same cabin. Maybe there's an upgrade to a higher cabin. Those are minor to a customer. The major impact items are much broader than that, right? Changing to departure and airport arrival airport. If you thought you were going into LaGuardia and now you're going into JFK, that could be a pretty big impact for the customer, especially if they have an onward journey that might now involve having to take a bus to another airport, those kinds of things. Changing of the route, any dates, whatever. Equipment change, again, we talked about that before. These are some major impact items. Moving on. Now looking at booking code inventory. This one to me was, I wasn't so aware that there were so many different ways to talk about booking inventory. And so there are apparently 4 that we came up with, at least from our different people in the group. The RBD, Reservation Booking Designator, class of service, was also utilizing RBD. Booking code, that's another one, and inventory code. So really the group felt that to be the best descriptor for this particular item, it's a Reservation Booking Designator, the RBD, so that when you're having conversations or you're putting your policies out there, utilizing this descriptor would really actually give the most understanding to the most people. Okay.
Paige, there is a question that came in, and I think you had just mentioned it on one of your previous slides. The question is, so any change within 74 hours will be involuntary or a schedule change? Can you clarify that?
So for this particular one, what we were talking about here is that anything, if the invol happens within 72 hours, it would be considered an IROP, an irregular operation. If it's outside of the 72 hours, it would be considered a schedule change, a planned schedule change. So the closer you are into travel, it becomes an irregular operation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paige. And if Sandeep, whoever, if you need further clarification on that, just write us back in. Thank you.
No, to be fair on that particular one, many carriers have differing opinions about when they actually call something an irregular operation. Again, this is a holistic kind of view as to this would be the best way to describe each of those 2 different types of schedule change processes. And it is, again, not mandatory, but that is definitely the best way the group thought forward.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paige. No more questions at this time.
Okay. Okay, GDS communication of changes. This one is a little different in that the airlines have very different ways that they work via the GDS or not to communicate schedule changes or IROPs to the agencies. Now, ideally, it comes in at the segment level via the GDS in a normal queue type of process. That is, agencies very much understand how to manage that. I will never say that everyone does everything perfectly, so don't please make that assumption. But I mean, they understand the process and they have definite people in place to be able to manage that. There are a lot of times when airlines are requiring OSI or SSR remarks. They're putting the information there, which if the agency has the ability to run a query or to actually query all of their PNRs to grab this information, that's pretty successful, I guess, but it is much more difficult for them to have to go find it than for it to be presented to them on a queue. Some airlines are actually posting bulletins to their websites. Those are very different and difficult because the agency has to go to a particular website to go find those. And then when you're working with 200 different airlines, it is very egregious and time-consuming to have to go and do that. Other airlines are sending out email blasts to agency subscribers. Again, the word subscriber there is key. The agency has to know to go and subscribe, but then they also have to look to this email, understand what the issues might be, and then go figure out which tickets this email applies to. So that can be a difficult way for an agency to work through their tickets. And also there are some agency-specific communications. Those are kind of one-offs. Those are bilateral agreements. I'm going to send you this in this format for these particular kinds of events. And even apparently there, in 2020, we do have some phone calls that go out to the agencies about each PNR that might be impacted. So there are so many different ways to manage these communications, but definitely the focus group felt that the best way to do that would be utilizing that GDS at the segment level with standard queue processing and segment status code rules. So this is, I think, again, many airlines are doing it this way today, but there are exceptions. Okay.
And Paige, we do have some other questions that have come in.
Right.
Should an irregular operations be processed as an involuntary exchange?
Irregular operation.
Yeah, it says irregular. Should an irregular operation be processed as an involuntary exchange?
Well, I think if the irregular operation is that your flight is no longer going and then you need to put a customer on another flight, then yes, it definitely has to be processed as an involuntary change because the customer's not, they didn't know about it. They hadn't planned to go at 3 o'clock in the afternoon instead of 12 noon. However, the airlines mostly are able to give the customer, here's a suggestion of what you could do, but then the agent is usually, in most cases, able to go and ask the customer, does 3 o'clock work for you, or would you rather go a little earlier? So that they're able to do some of those kinds of things. So it definitely is an involuntary change. However, it's going to be a little subjective in there as to how that's managed.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paige. Here's another question. I understand that IROC and SCUD changes are recommended definitions. Will those be turned into an IATA resolution?
Well, unfortunately, no. ARC is very different from IATA. We do not have our own passenger agency set of resolutions. We do, A4A is our governing body for resolution, is compatible with the IATA passenger service resolutions. And we do participate with A4A and we create our documents to mirror those resolutions that they have adopted. But when it comes to a definition type of thing, this is truly a best practice here for the ARC affiliated agents, airlines, and GDSs. Now, to say that, I've said that, but our counterpart in the IATA world, the Debit Memo User Group, they have asked for a copy of this document. I provided it to them, and we are going to be kind of working through that group with some information about what we're doing. And there are many people who are on our group who are on their group also. And so there may be the opportunity for that group to bring this to IATA for an update to resolution. But I don't drive any of that. ARC doesn't drive any of that, because those are passenger agency resolutions, not passenger conference resolutions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paige. And I'm going to ask Jacob, you asked a rather lengthy question, and then you had some additions to that question. If you wouldn't mind raising your hand so that maybe Paige can interact with you and you can ask the different variations of that question live, that would be helpful. If not, I will try to get through that. But if you go to your control panel and raise your hand, that would be really helpful, Jacob. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to this next question page. It says, I'm not sure if this will be covered later in the webinar, but if a flight is canceled, we know that the passenger is entitled to a refund. During COVID, lots of flights were canceled last minute. If the agency cancels the reservation, say 3 days prior to the departure, knowing the passenger cannot travel due to government guidelines and travel bans, but the airline has not canceled the flight in the GDS until the day after the passenger canceled, is the passenger entitled to a refund? That's kind of a hefty question.
It's a great question, and we are hearing that a lot. And truly, from the airlines that I talk to, daily, weekly, there is a variety of answers to that, and it truly is up to the airline to make the decision. The issue here is that if I cancel my flight before the airline cancels it, I don't have anything to go back and refund because I canceled, unless my ticket's refundable. Now, I should have access to exchange that ticket, and I can definitely see that, and maybe there's a no change fee or something, I don't know. But the thing is that each airline has to make that individual decision on how they're going to manage that. And there are a wide variety of ways that airlines are doing so. So I don't want to say what you have to do or what you're required to do, because it truly is an airline decision. However, we do also know that the DOT has said if you're canceling a flight, the customer should be due a refund. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to draw an inference from that yourself.
Okay. Great, Paige. There's more questions coming in, and actually Jacob has raised his hand, so I'm going to turn it over to him actually to ask this question live. Jacob, go ahead.
Hi, Jacob. I think maybe
Jacob?
You're muted.
Nope, he's unmuted. Yep. Jacob, we'll come back to you, but keep your hand raised. Paige, we'll let you continue, and we'll see if we can get Jacob on the line. Thanks.
All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about here is GDS communication of changes for something like an uncanceled segment, the HXs. And every airline, again, has different ways to manage this business, and there are many scenarios listed here, as you can see. And what we have kind of come to conclusion in the focus group is that it would be, again, helpful for the agent to understand why there's an HX. Is it because of an IROP? Is it because of an upgrade? Is it because of a customer contacted the airline directly? Whatever the issue is. And in the document, there's a much more exhaustive list of examples. And it would be fabulous if there was an opportunity for, when you have to do the HXs, that there is an explanation of sorts that will inform the agent what happened. Because ideally what happens is that something gets canceled, and then the agent has to go to the customer, and the customer says, well, why? And they don't know. They cannot give a good answer. And so to be a little more transparent, it would be helpful if there's an opportunity to provide some examples to give the agent more information. Okay. All right, so let's talk about customer contact information. This has been something that came out. There was if you remember, there was an IATA resolution or change to recommended practice about the customer contact information and where to put it, how to put it. Debit memos could be issued without it. I mean, all sorts of different rules and regulations surrounding that. And the agents in our group agreed there should be customer information, email, phone number, in the actual PNR, so that if there is this, irregular operation closer in than 72 hours, that there's a way to contact the customer should the agent not be able to do it. Agents are happy and really glad to want to service their customers extensively. But in the case that that for some reason cannot reach, the agency can't reach them, or the agency is unaware, they want the airline to be able to send a text, send this email to the customer to be able to make sure that they're aware of what's happening. So and it should be truly, one of the other issues was it going to all operating carriers, not just the ticketing carrier, that it should be passed through the PNRs if there are code shares or reciprocal ticket agreements between carriers on the itinerary. Everyone should have access to the information, especially if the customer potentially would be overseas and need to get some information, and maybe the agent's on a totally different time zone. So there are great opportunities here. Agents and airlines especially are both instigating that this should be really the best way to communicate via NIROP, and not with just an agency email or agency phone number. Okay? Moving on. Okay, so let's talk about managing those customer expectations with reprotection and refund. The first item we can go ahead and down is to look at how where there are opportunities to empower agents. Now, I understand that there are times when airlines don't want agencies to have a lot of power, and there are times when airlines want the agencies to have extensive capabilities because they can't manage all of their customers themselves. So talking about policy and process, there should definitely be, every airline should have an online space where involuntary change policies and processes are posted and are accessible without password protect by travel agencies 24/7. It's just necessary for agencies to be able to do their jobs effectively. There are many agencies who have a website, but they keep it password protected. And while everyone can understand the need to do so many times, in this kind of this type of information that's being displayed is really only going to be able to be used by the travel agent. So I don't think there's a big potential for concern for someone seeing the information that maybe isn't in the travel industry, but it was so beneficial for the agent community. And flexibility. I've heard from many airlines, we are trying to empower our agents to do as much as we can. We need their assistance. We need their help. But yet there are some airlines that are a little less aggressive in offering capability or empowerment to the agent, and certainly not flexibility. And so the agents are required to be utilizing the phone or an email to start this process of how we're reaccommodating our customers. Definitely best practice would be to provide the opportunity so that the agencies, they want to be able to build in some automation. And if the rules are not are so stringent with no flexibility, it's very difficult for a particular ticket to fall into that particular issue perfectly to be able to build the automation around it. And then degree of change of parameters. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where the validating carrier, today there are problems when you have two different carriers on the PNR, on the ticket, and maybe the schedule change happens after the validating carrier segments have been flown, and there's only the remaining segments that are out there. And then here comes the schedule change. So there is a lot of back and forth that happens when the agency goes in to try to, correct the ticket, reaccommodate the customer, and they're calling the carrier who had the schedule change, which is now the non-validating carrier. And they call and they say, oh, no, we didn't issue the ticket. You need to go to the validating carrier to get their policy, or you have to manage it because they're the validating carrier. And then the agency will call the validating carrier, and the validating carrier says, oh, no, not my schedule change. This is the downline airline, and you need to use their policy because it's their schedule change. So as you can see, that is a very, very difficult position for an agent to be in, because they just want to help the customer. They want to get the customer on the plane. They want to follow the airline rules for doing so, but it's a very difficult process. So ideally, the validating carrier should be the policy owner of the reaccommodation, the schedule change, the IROP, whatever. That is the recommendation of the IROP Schedule Change Focus Group. Okay.
Paige, another question has come in. With the IROP scenarios, should these be considered as involuntary reissues, or are all IROP scenarios are involuntary reissue? So I guess the question is, are they all considered involuntary reissues?
I think I have a question about your question, unfortunately, because I want to be sure that I'm answering you correctly, and I am afraid I will not, because there's obviously something very specific about the way you're asking the question. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could note, can you tell who that is, Judy, so that I could maybe get back to them with a little follow-up?
Absolutely.
Sure.
It's
yep.
I have it. I have it noted. Would it help if they raised their hand and they asked it?
Yeah, I mean, that would be fine too. Either way.
Yep. If Sandeep, if you want to unmute if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you to ask Paige, so we can get that question cleared up for you. I'll leave that up to you. Otherwise, Paige, I do have the information. Okay. Let me see. Another question has come in. Does this work for UN segments? And that may be referring to something you talked about in a couple of previous slides.
I think you're probably back talking when we talked about HX segments and the UN segments, all different kinds of different segments.
That's right.
It is best if you can utilize the GDS to communicate your changes. I understand that there are limitations, whether it's technology, whether it's cost, whether it's whatever, to be able to manage that as an airline. But it is always best to communicate with an agency with an electronic GDS message via the queue process. It is very helpful, and it will help them to expedite their work, as well as reaccommodate customers, make sure that they've got the correct changes and the correct opportunity to help the customer and get them on their way.
Great, thank you, Paige. Sandeep, you did raise your hand. Do you want to ask Paige your question?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
Hi, Paige. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. Actually, while having this session, I'm just a little bit curious about the ROP changes. That all the regular changes should be considered as involuntary, or there will be some scenarios where those will be considered as schedule change.
And then when they're considered a schedule change itself, not IROP. Well, if we adopt the rule that we talked about earlier that talks about the 72-hour notice, I would say that there is a very clear-cut line as to when something is an IROP and when something is a schedule change. And if you are unable to adopt that particular 72-hour cutoff, then yes, I could definitely see where you may have some different types of possibilities for an agent, depending on how you as an airline are classifying that particular issue that has arisen. So, you know, if you say that only, you know, schedule changes are everything up to 24 hours, and you have something that happens at 48, you may process the change differently than an airline that is utilizing the 72-hour rule. That's difficult for the agent just because they have to remember that your particular airline might be different. And they're managing it today. They just can't manage it as efficiently and effectively as they could be if it was more standardized. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. And if anyone else wants to raise their hand, just put that on, raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, just make sure to self-mute. Let me just see, Paige. I think that, is the PCT the same as the CTCS?
I am so sorry. There were a lot of letters there.
Yeah, there's a lot. Is the Paul, Charlie, Tom, Charlie, so PCTC, the same as the CTCSs? Does that make sense?
And are we talking, I think that's talking about the customer contact information. Is that correct?
That is what I'm assuming. And
okay.
Alex, if you want to raise your hand and ask your question, that would be helpful. Otherwise, if you want to write in and clarify for Paige.
And of course, if we don't get to all of the questions for some reason, we can always answer. And everyone will be
Alex. Okay,
Paige,
and Paige, here's Alex. We can hear you.
Yes. Yeah, my question was regarding there's a new way to put the passenger contact information. It's CTC, ECTC, I don't know, but before we used to use the PCTC, point of contact or personal contact. Is there a difference between PCTC, personal contact, or CTC, MCTC? I don't remember which are the other ones, but there are like 3 CTCs now.
Well, let's just make it fun and make 3. Why do we need just 1, right? Well, let me be very honest. I will need to look into that because I am not aware of the differences in those particular formats. And so I will need to take that and do a little research before I answer your question.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, Paige, that's all the questions for now.
All right, so the next piece of looking to find a way to standardize is the whole major and minor kind of degree of change for a particular event that's happening. So these are the recommended parameters for not allowing a rebook or a refund for like a minor change, like the flight number change only, higher cabin upgrade, change of the marketing airline, but the operating airline is the same. Those are very, very minor items. And then that would allow for rebooking or refund, there's a big time change. Now, in here, we've noted a departure arrival time of X minutes or more. I think the airline needs to determine for themselves what that X number of minutes is. Is it 2 hours? Is it 6 hours? I mean, those kinds of things. But that is the type of information that would be available on your website so that agents could very explicitly understand if this occurs within this time frame, then I can do this. Then there's also the things about missing connection, increased flight segments so that now you're connecting in more cities. You were stopping once, now you're stopping 3 times. An unacceptable change in the operating airline. Maybe you certainly don't want to fly a particular airline for some reason. I mean, the customer says absolutely not for whatever reason. There are different reasons why you want to call something major. If there's a flight canceled and there's no acceptable option, that seems like that is a pretty major event to me. And I know that there are some locations where there is only maybe a flight once a week, or maybe twice a week, and that would cut the customer's vacation or something, in half, and that wouldn't be an acceptable time. So there are definite things like that we want to be sure that airlines are clarifying on their policy websites for the agents, so that they're very clear as to what they are and are not able to do. Okay, moving on. This one's around managing the customer expectation for the irregular operation, right? And so the focus here is that when the airline provides an opportunity to manage their bookings either online or provides options for them to view, shop, whatever, in the case of involuntary changes, that should happen within that 72-hour time frame we just talked about, right? As well, airlines that manage their IROP situations that occur within 24 hours, but up to the 72-hour limit of departure, airlines probably have more leverage working with other airlines to, say, reaccommodate a customer, as opposed to an agency trying to reaccommodate that customer. So if the airline could say, I'm going to manage this problem for this customer because it's within a 24-hour time frame maybe, or maybe 36 hours, something on that line, there's probably a better opportunity for the customer to get a better option than the agency might be able to offer, just because the airlines are obviously in the business of working with, at some points, with their competitors to try to accommodate customers for unforeseen circumstances. So that is the recommendation here, is that there is a cutoff where the agencies feel that would be more advantageous to have the airline try to manage the customer. Another one of those pieces that you think about, we see all the time, is the corporate customer, right, who works with travel agency A, that's their TMC, and they've had that relationship for a very long time. There's an irregular operation, the customer now is off the plane, and they're standing in line, and they have their agent on the phone trying to see which one can work with them faster, and truly the airline has probably already reaccommodated them on their phone, on their app. So that's one of those situations where the agents really don't have nearly as much leverage, because the airline's already probably processing a lot of that via their computer systems and their automated change systems to be able to accommodate their customers quickly. Okay, moving on to the next. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the unique situations, which are unique in themselves, if you want to move on. One of the items here is this downgrade in the cabin, and the IROP Sched Change Group's recommendation is that part of really a standard policy, the airlines have a specific call out for this scenario as to how they would prefer, in most cases, for this to be handled. Should it go through the airline, or should it go through the agency? It's a difficult conversation for either stakeholder, the agency or the airline, to have that conversation with the customer that, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to sit in business. You're now sitting in coach. Many times the airline will be able to offer some sort of accommodation for that customer for taking that downgrade. But there really should be a called out scenario in the policy about how this should be handled and who should be handling it. And many of our favorites, the minimum connection time, okay, those are they happen all the time. But unfortunately, once a ticket's been issued, if there is a change to the minimum connect time, there is no advisory from the airline that this minimum connection time has been changed. And so therefore, a ticket that's already issued will potentially will actually misconnect, or there won't be enough time. And then if that happens, then of course the customer is missing their next flight, or their bags aren't making it. Things like that are not happening. And if there are MCT changes, the group would like to note that there is that things are being monitored, and that their PNRs are being monitored to advise the agency of changes that are happening to potential tickets that are potentially going to be impacted. This is, again, a very difficult process, and I know from talking to many agents that there have been times where the agency receives a message or a memo from an airline saying you didn't ticket according to MCT restriction. And it turns out that at the time of ticket issuance, it did have an MCT that met the actual itinerary. However, in the meantime, between ticket issuance and flight, there was a problem. There was a change. So this is a request regarding the minimum connect time. Okay. Moving on. All right, the last thing, or the next to the last thing, we're going to move a little more quickly here, is the customer experience, and we'll go for the next slide, please. We're trying to set the customer expectations. We hope that the airlines and agencies have some sort of FAQ page for customers. Not just the airlines, but the agencies also, that talk about how to manage through and what types of things they could expect if there was an involuntary change. The customer is both the agencies and airlines customer together, and they need to be sure that their customers understand what's happening. And also there should be some resources. First touch, what we're calling first touch, first call resolution, is that airlines should truly be providing policies that, as we talked about before, empower the agent to help to partner with them and resolve the situations quickly on the airline's behalf with one contact. That would be ideal, because the faster that the customer is reaccommodated, the better the customer experience they're going to have. Okay. And then avoiding that debit memo. Going ahead, please. Then there are opportunities always to improve the memo process. I don't think anyone denies that. There are different perspectives, agencies and GDSs and airlines on how to manage. But I think we've talked about quite a few of these already, these clear and available policies. Version control is one thing that I don't know that every airline has, but when you update policies, if you could timestamp it, version it, something along the line, and then hold those in an archive so that the agencies can go back and find what was in place at the time a particular ticket was issued or whatever. I know that most airlines are doing that with their travel policies, and they are very adept at doing great version control, noting that these cities, these dates, these ticketing times, whatever, were included now, and now we have extended and changed them to these times. They've done a great job with that. Again, minor administrative errors, I think, is one of the big scourges of the agency community, as you all probably know. They transpose a number in a waiver code or a contract number. Maybe they put it in a tour code box and it was asked to be in the endorsement box. Those are some of those things that would help to avoid the memo if those were allowed. Again, recommendation, not a mandate, because I know there are some airlines who are very, very set and have very set policies on this. But it would be helpful. It would be helpful in this memo process. Again, waiver code placement. One thing I want to say here, if you're offering a waiver code in an exchange transaction, putting it in the endorsement box on a new ticket, in the tour code box, wherever you decide you like to have it, in the OSI, whatever, is great. However, in the refund, you can't put, and I have seen it, where an agency's been asked to put a waiver code for a refund in the endorsement box. Well, there is no endorsement box on a refund because there's no ticket for the refund. And so the waiver for a refund needs to be done in the GDS in the waiver code field. That will then pass in the SPURF file, which is the system provider file that comes to us from the GDSs with all of the transactions every night. It will go into our system and will be displayed there. The waiver code is in our the interactive agent reporting tool. And then we do send that waiver code back to the agency to the airline on the CAP file for you all to have and be able to pass on potentially to, if you have an audit vendor or if you're auditing internally, you'll be able to see that waiver code for the refund. So just a little clarification there that box just has to be used for a refund. Okay, we can move to the next. I think we're very close to the end. Any further questions that you all have, I'm happy to field if there are any.
Yeah, Paige, there is. This one goes back to chargebacks, and it says, how are chargebacks being handled during COVID?
Okay, they're being handled truly in many different ways by different airlines. In the example that the person gave on the phone earlier was that a customer cancels their flight before the airline cancels the flight. And some airlines are utilizing that and saying, I've canceled the flight, we're gonna give the customer the refund and be done with it. Some are saying no, they weren't allowed to cancel prior to flight. I won't give them a refund, but they did cancel before the flight, so potentially they could have maybe a credit. There are other ones where the customer wanted a refund, but the airline wasn't giving a refund at the time, right? They couldn't, for whatever reason, they weren't, whatever the issue. And the customer says, well, I'll charge it back. Now, again, some airlines have taken the position, if the chargeback comes in and I show that I've canceled the flight, I will not issue the memo. There are other airlines who have said, no, you don't get to charge me back. If I was potentially going to give you a refund or a voucher or something on that line for future travel, that was my opportunity as an airline, and I'm allowed to do that. So they do issue the memo. Now, if we're talking about the ARC's blog post that we put out back in April that said ARC will not be holding any airline, or excuse me, any agency responsible for a COVID-related memo or a dispute for payment with an airline. Let me outline exactly what that meant. That actually meant that, one, the agency has the opportunity to identify a particular memo that's related to COVID-19 for a chargeback by putting some particular verbiage in the agency reason code or in their agency FlexField 6 code in Memo Manager. And when these memos go to, we have an in-house collection agent for any type of memo that involves an ARA potential violation, which is the agent reporting agreement that we have in place with every agent. When they call and they contact the agent says, oh, this is a COVID-related memo, then we will no longer be collecting on that particular debit memo. Also, we will not potentially put an agency who has many chargeback memos for COVID-related debit memos into default for non-payment of those. Now, the exception to the rule is if we can prove blatant fraud as normal, 100% we will be going after that. But I believe that in most of the cases with current memos that are being issued that are COVID-related, that they truly are the customer wanting a refund, the customer being impatient, the customer not liking the decision of the airline or the message that was conveyed, that they wouldn't be getting a refund but maybe a credit voucher down the road. So I hope I've covered in all of that how chargebacks are being managed with COVID-19. If I have not, please put another comment in or another question, and I can respond to you afterwards.
Paige, there's 2 more questions. I don't know if you have a hard stop right at 2 o'clock.
I'm okay if you can, it's fine.
Yep, I'm going to say to anyone on the line, I'm going to ask these 2 more questions of Paige, and if anyone needs to drop off, this session does end in 1 minute. But Paige, I'm going to just ask these because it might be helpful to anyone that wants to stay on and listen. It says waiver codes. This is where a lot of agencies receive debit memos. Do you have instructions for all GDSs on how to properly place a refund waiver code? Is this information on the ARC website?
I believe it's on the ARC website. I have the keystrokes basically, or the general keystrokes for each for the waiver code, and how to put that into the GDS. If you can please, I can get that to you, or we can put it out in the question and answer as a response. I can give that to you for sure. Yes.
Great, and I do have their name and contact page to provide that.
Perfect.
Then the next one is, I know that this webinar does not cover UATP cards, but do you have some questions related to this? Is there someone I can contact to address my question?
Yeah, why don't you send it to me? That would be fine, and then I'll get you. If I can't answer it, I'm happy to get it moved forward to get you an answer.
And Paige, to contact you?
Yes, that'd be great. If you could give my address.
Yep, perfect. Yep. Does an agency lose control of a PNR if a passenger makes changes and reissues directly with the airline? And that will be our last question.
Okay, so yes, in most cases, yes, unless the airline releases authority control back to the agency. The issue there is that if the airline has actually reaccommodated and reissued the ticket, usually the agency has no control over how to manage that airline issued ticket. And so that is a concern, especially from the agency perspective, because they want, many, especially if it's a TMC and duty of care for their customers. So there are some issues there, but be aware that it is difficult to give the authority back, although some airlines can do it.
Okay, great. And there's just one other raised their hand, and that was Anja, that was going to clarify a previous question on there. Anja, are you still on the line?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. My name is Anja, and I am working for Hahn Air in Germany, and I'm actually working on chargebacks. At the moment, I have done many things regarding audits, and I've seen many irregularities that were being reissued and exchanged. And I would like to say 2 things. There was this conflict, like when you don't insert this information, that flight reservation cannot be held. So that is one thing I would like to know. I would like to say.
Okay.
Possible. I would like to say I'm sorry.
No, I said.
Sure, no problem. I would like to say 2 things, and that is, first of all, the easy, or in order to have it easier, because there will always be schedules, several things in the future, I would say, and one is the fact that airlines should always offer an alternative flight. This is not always the case, and then agents start to find flights by themselves, which is not always the same carrier. This is a problem. I would say this also has to change, and if they don't offer a specific flight, then at least they should insert in an SSR line which criteria the new flight must meet. This is my personal opinion, because I see so many problems for this. Agents, on the other hand, must work on their queue, because this is a big problem. Agents constantly, many agents, I'm not saying that all do that, but there are so many agents out there who do not even realize that a schedule change is happening. This is a big problem also. And last but not least, we experience that there are agents out there who, instead of working on the refunds by themselves, say to their customers, just make a chargeback. That's the easiest way. That's not the easiest way, if I may say so.
And especially when you're going to issue a debit memo right back to that agent.
Well, it's actually not that easy, because this is not how it's done, at least not on our side. It's actually done in a way that we, first of all, get into communication. Can you please check with the cardholder? What was the background of this? You know what I'm saying? So we do wait a while, but then you work on this case so long, but then finally we get to understand that that agent has recommended to that cardholder that the easiest way to get his money back is to make a chargeback. And that, to be honest, is really a problem, especially in these times.
I agree.
It is a problem without Corona, but it is a problem with Corona as well.
Yes, yes. I mean, the chargeback is definitely not unique to coronavirus, but it has just been enhanced, and we've seen so many recently because of the different ways airlines are handling their refunds.
That's right. Yes.
Definitely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your comments and questions.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. Judy?
Sorry, I was on mute. I do want to say thank you very much, Paige, and thank you for all of you that are still on the line that kind of hung out here with us for the last 5 or 6 minutes. But I thought the questions were important, and seeing we had Paige here, I thought it was nice to try to get some of those in for those that stayed on the call. Thank you very much, Paige. Thank you. Thank you for all of you that were in attendance today. This recorded webinar will be emailed out. It will also be posted on our ARC website on Webinars on Demand. Also, I just want to mention we do have another webinar coming up this Thursday, which is Keep Fraud Down When Business Ramps Up. That's going to be this Thursday, and it starts at 12 noon Eastern Time. You should all be getting an invitation in the mail for that. So look forward to that. Also look for Fraud Month coming up again in August, and there'll be about 6 or 7 sessions that all of you will be invited to as well. So again, thanks everyone. Thank you, Paige, and thanks to the audience. Thank you.
Thanks,
we look to see you, and we look to see you again in the future. Thank you.